to introduce the real-life drama of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre and how it relates to characters and events in Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy. It was Catherine de Medici who engineered the political marriage between her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, and Henry of Navarre, a union which was supposedly intended to keep the tensions between the Protestants and the Catholics in check. But in reality, there was a much more sinister intention behind the invitations to the wedding, which were sent out to all the most distinguished Huguenot lords and ladies in France. They flocked to attend the celebrations in Paris, little suspecting the treachery that awaited them. The plot hatched by the Queen in confederacy with the Guise faction was first to assassinate the three most prominent Protestant leaders, Henry of Navarre, the Prince de Condé, and the Admiral de Coligny. Unfortunately, this surgical strike was to be the prelude to mass murder. And so the wedding party became the occasion for a massacre, which literally soaked the new Queen of Navarre's bed with Huguenot blood. A strange honeymoon. In a desperate attempt to escape his Guise assassins, at least one Huguenot officer sought refuge in Marguerite's bed. The murder of Admiral de Coligny and some of the other leading Huguenots led to an outbreak of Catholic mob violence throughout France and to the deaths of tens of thousands of Protestants. In this painting, you can see the body of Coligny hanging out of the window, and in the left background, Catherine de Medici inspecting a heap of corpses. The event shocked Europe, England especially, but it also traumatized its perpetrators, Catherine and her son Charles IX. The Queen almost went mad with guilt after the massacre that she herself had initiated. It is reported that to distract her, the sexual Machiavels, her flying squadron of court ladies, danced before her naked. This desperate need for distraction brings us to Macbeth and to some striking parallels between the haunted nightmares of Catherine and Charles and the disintegration of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Both the Scottish play and the events surrounding the French massacre involved the grossest violation of hospitality and a powerful woman spurring a man to do the dreadful deed, summoned by the ringing of a bell. The guilty pair then fall victim to nightmares, sleeplessness, and hauntings. A vision of a future line of kings is conjured by witchcraft. There is alienation from others, fearful insecurity, fear even of the self. In murdering their Huguenot guests, Catherine and Charles were guilty of breaking the sacred code of hospitality, as Macbeth reflects on Duncan.
He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself.
And Banquo too is a guest betrayed,
He's our chief guest,
says Macbeth. Welcome him to the palace in Act 3, while giving instructions to the two murderers for him to be killed. Catherine's role in spurring on the bloodlust of Charles IX on the eve of the massacre is reported by the French Protestant historian de Thou. He says, "The Queen, fearing lest the king, who she thought she did observe, still wavering and staggering at the horridness of the enterprise, should change his mind, comes into his bedchamber at midnight. The king was upbraided by his mother, that by delaying he would let slip a fair occasion, offered him by God, of subduing his enemies, by which speech the king, finding himself accused of cowardice, and being of himself a fierce nature, gave command to put the thing in execution.
We will proceed no further in this business. He hath honoured me of late, and I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon.
Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Have it slept since? And wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? From this time such I account thy love. Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Wouldst thou have that thou esteem'st the ornament of life, and live a coward in thine own esteem, letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat of the adage?
Macbeth orders a servant to have Lady Macbeth ring a bell when his drink is ready. When the bell rings, Macbeth, having screwed his courage to the sticking place, takes it as a signal to kill King Duncan.
Go, bid thy mistress, when my drink is ready, she strike upon the bell.
30 lines later,
I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell.
on that fateful night in Paris, it was Catherine de' Medici who gave the signal to ring a distant church bell. The signal to kill Coligny and his entourage. How do we know about the details of Catherine and Charles' behaviour after the massacre? We know from the direct testimony of Henry of Navarre, who witnessed it and reported it to the French poet and chronicler Théodore Agrippa d'Aubigné. He reported it in his epic poem. We might now call it a docudrama, entitled Les Tragiques. D'Aubigné states that such unfortunate brains as Catherine's so encouraged the populace to evil that it soaked knives in old men's blood. This phrase finds a striking echo in Lady Macbeth's speech in Act 5.
Out, damned spot, out, I say. Yet who would have thought the old man would have had so much blood in him?
A second episode, much later in Catherine's career in 1588, prefigures the guilt, nightmares and hauntings of the Macbeths. This was the terrible death of Catherine's sometime ally and sometime enemy, the Cardinal of Lorraine. He was an arch-Catholic who had exulted in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. D'Aubigné gives us an account of the terrifying death of the Cardinal, based on the testimony of Henri IV. He says, "Your voice has testified that at the moment this soul fled its place, you saw this queen rise from her bed in fear, who showed you the place where the dead cardinal met her, face to say farewell. She hid her eyes, and her fear made your hair stand on end." The contemporary chronicler Pierre de l'Estoile gives a further account of Catherine's haunting by the dead cardinal, which reminds us of Banquo's ghost at the dinner. To quote, "This queen, the queen mother, sitting down at table, said, 'Shall we now have peace, since the Cardinal of Lorraine is dead?' Who was the one that prevented it? So they said. Then, having asked for a drink, when they had given her the glass, she began to tremble, so much that they thought she would drop it. And she cried, 'Jesus! That is my lord, the Cardinal of Lorraine, whom I see.' Finally, being a little reassured, she said, 'This is a great example of fear.' Still, she could not sleep or remain alone for a month, and imagined all the time he beckoned her to follow him." The scene of Banquo at the feast is Shakespeare's own innovation.
Here is a place reserved, sir.
The table's full.
Here, my good lord.
Sorry, the table's full. Here's a place reserved. Where?
Here, my good lord. What's that moves, your highness?
Which of you have done this?
What, my good lord?
Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me.
Gentlemen, rise. His highness is not well.
Oh, sit, worthy friends. My lord is often thus, and hath been from his youth. Pray, keep seat, the fit is momentary. Upon a thought he will again be well. If much you note him, you shall offend him, and extend his passion. Feed, and regard him not. Are you a man?
Aye, and a bold one that dare look on that which might appall the devil.
Oh, proper stuff. This is the very painting of your fear. What? Quite unmanned in folly?
If I stand here, I saw him.
Catherine de Medici's use of witchcraft was notorious. Geoffrey Bullock, in his narrative and dramatic sources of Shakespeare, notes this. He comments on the marked affinities between the sinister temperament of Lady Macbeth and the Protestant black vision of Catherine, regarded as the fiendish queen. He quotes a current story. A magician conjures a vision for her in a mirror, a vision of the succession of the French monarchy, which she breaks off in despair when the circling years of her son's reigns are succeeded by the longer cycles of Henry of Navarre. This has marked parallels with the scene in Act 4, when the witches conjure a vision of a show of 8 kings, which will grieve Macbeth's heart.
What is this that rises like the issue of a king and wears upon his baby brow the round and top of sovereignty?
Show his eyes and grieve his heart. Come like shadows, so depart.
Thou art too like the spirit of Banquo, down. Thy crown dost sear mine eyeballs, and thy hair, thou other gold-bound brow, is like the first. The third is like the former. Filthy hags, why do you show me this? A fourth? Start, eyes. What, will the line stretch out to the crack of doom? Another yet? A seventh? I'll see no more. And yet the 8th appears, who bears a glass which shows me many more.
What happens to Charles IX after the massacre also happens to Macbeth and to Richard III, haunted by the ghosts of those they have murdered, whether asleep or awake. A total insecurity and a complete moral collapse, leading to the loss of self. After the massacre, Charles IX is gripped with fear. He holds 2 Huguenot princes prisoner, Henry of Navarre and the Prince de Condé. He is on the verge of executing them, but his conscience attacks him. He jumps from his bed and wakes the whole palace at midnight, screaming of the Furies. Daubigny reports this incident in colourful detail and continues to quote, "Death gnaws on him at evening, all night scolds him, the day hisses like a snake, his own soul harms him, it fears itself, it flees from itself. You, imprisoned prince, witness of these marvels, have instructed our ears with this account. One has seen your hair stand on end, telling these horrible events at table, in public." Shakespeare echoes this episode in the addition he makes to his sources for Richard III. Also, of course, a situation where a tyrant plots the deaths of 2 princes. Richard's nightmare, at midnight before the Battle of Bosworth, expresses the same anguish as Charles, of a soul fearful of itself.
O coward conscience, how thou dost afflict me. Lights burn blue. 'Tis now dead midnight. Cold, fearful drops stand on my trembling flesh. What do I fear? Myself? There's none else by. Then fly. What, from myself? Great reason. Why? Lest I revenge. What, myself upon myself?
Brief conclusion. All these parallels between real historical events in France and Shakespeare's Scottish play are referenced in the work of Geoffrey Bullock and Professor Hugh Richmond, both orthodox Stratfordians, drawing on primary French sources whose publications post-date the conventional dating of the play between 1603 and 1606. And yet, despite this acknowledgement, a convincing explanation for this potent and detailed French connection eludes them. Professor Richmond concludes rather lamely, and Eddie quoted this earlier this morning, Shakespeare would have gathered all of it, the information, himself by a little research and careful questioning of his own friends and contemporaries. And Bullock, having devoted several pages to drawing an elaborate network of cross-references between Catherine de' Medici and Charles IX and the Macbeths, can state, there is no need to believe Shakespeare consciously recalled St. Bartholomew.